Welcome to a special edition of Talking Feds. I'm Harry Littman. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Katie Porter, who in 4 short years has vaulted from teaching law to national prominence as one of the most impactful and visible members of Congress, and now a candidate for U.S. Senate. She currently represents the 47th Congressional District in Orange County, California, and from 2019 to 2023, she represented the 45th District of the Golden State. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining.
I'm excited to be here.
So, you recently published an offbeat autobiography, I Swear Politics Are Messier Than My Minivan. It's by turn kind of a puckish memoir and a policy manifesto. I'd like to begin with your personal biography that you recount there. So you grow up as a 4-H kid in rural Iowa and make your way at age 16 to the most elite educational institutions in the country, a solid career as a tenured law professor. What impelled you to take the leap into electoral politics? I know you'd done policy work, but a whole different life in your 40s.
Well, I loved the policy work. I cared a lot about trying to pass regulations, about having those regulations actually enforced. Because what I would hear is that, we have this, I would read as a law professor, here's this great consumer protection law. And then I would look at the consumers, the people that I was trying to represent when I did foreclosure prevention work, and the law was just getting broken all of the time. So I started to realize that one of the problems is that when we're writing laws, we are not thinking enough about how they are going to be enforced. And so really trying to close that gap. And I think this is what oversight is about closing that gap between what politicians announce at press conferences and then what happens in everyday people's lives. And so I really wanted to go to Washington and do policy work. I wanted to work for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or the Federal Reserve or FDIC or HUD. And I was always something. I was always too qualified, not qualified enough, pregnant, just had a baby,
That's a disability in Washington.
enough.
Yeah.
Too political. And so I think, I really felt like there was going to be a moment for me in 2017 with the election of, we thought it would be Hillary Clinton. And when that disappeared, when Trump was elected, I remember feeling like I was just going to have to wait. I was just going to have to wait. Maybe in 4 years, we'd elect a Democrat, right? And I just decided, and someone told me, like, you're so impatient. Like, you wait for nothing. Why would you wait 4 years for someone to make it possible for you to go to DC and do policy work? If you want to do that, just do it. Just run for Congress. And so I was never one of these people who ran for junior high council. Right. I did not, was not born in a navy blue blazer, and khaki pants. I never thought of myself as political in that sense. I thought of myself as a policymaker. And even after getting to Congress, I was probably here 6 months, and a friend of mine, referred to me as a politician. And I was like, what? There's a politician in the room? And I realized she was talking about me, that I had become a politician. And I think one of the great surprises has been how much I really love doing the political work, the political part of the job, and actually trying to have it be more about policy in a way that I think, and less about partisanship, in a way that I think Democrats sometimes struggle with.
Yeah, your love of policy really comes through in the book, and I would have seen you as I realize now you were pushing for some role in D.C. and in another world. The book, Congresswoman, has this anecdote about an 83-year-old poor, uneducated woman, Pearl, and your young woman efforts to help her keep her home after she declared bankruptcy, though she was lucky in that way, or rare. But her story and her work struck me as a kind of a through line in the book, and maybe a model for the person you see yourself as fighting for generally. Is that accurate, would you say?
Well, the Pearl was represented by a friend of mine who was a legal aid lawyer. Yeah. And what that legal aid lawyer, she came to me as I was an academic, I was a professor, and she said, I just represented this woman, Pearl Maxwell. She's a woman. She's since passed away, and the bank cheated her. Like, at every step of the way, the bank just didn't follow any of the rules. And this lawyer, Tara, who's still my friend, she actually is now the head of the bankruptcy program for the Department of Justice. She just started. It's amazing. Um, but she said, is Pearl just so unlucky? Or do babies just break the rules all the time and nobody catches them and nobody like makes them do it? And so we started to do an academic study to see that. But I think that is a great example of kind of that oversight mentality that really came from Pearl. How do you have rules that powerful corporations can just break and ignore? Like, what's the point of fighting for the rule if everyone's going to break it on the back end? And so that is a through line, I would say, through the book and through my life. When I think about what I'm doing on natural resources right now, like oil companies who want to drill on public lands have to pay bonds. These bonds are supposed to guarantee that they clean up their own mess, which as a mom is a core value of mine. You clean up your own mess. You put your own dirty dishes in the dishwasher. The Bureau of Land Management, BLM, has the power to raise these bonds and make sure they're big enough to cover the cleanup costs. And they're not doing it. So again, what is the point of having a law that says BLM can do this if BLM is twiddling their thumbs and not enforcing it? And so I do see kind of throughout my life, yes, the substance of the law matters, but where I think I'm a little different and why I think I was drawn to hearings as a way to really make a difference in Congress was that's where you can kind of expose that gap between what the law promised to do and what's really happening.
Got it. And I want to come back to that, but just following up a little, I think you're not necessarily so easy to peg in traditional political terms. On the one hand, you're the deputy chair of the Progressive Caucus, much loved on the left. On the other, maybe like your political mentor, Senator Warren, your defining passion seems to be kind of economic fairness and a level playing field for consumers more than many of the other issues that your progressive colleagues focus on. Maybe you think that's unfair, but let me just ask this: to the extent you think these labels are coherent, where do you place yourself in the spectrum of Democrats and the Congress as a whole?
Yeah. I mean, look, I will tell you, having knocked a lot of doors, because one of the things that's different about me that you didn't mention is I also have run 3 hard races in a purple area. So in an area
Hugely,
where
yeah,
Republicans and Democrats are about equal numbers, and an area
yeah.
that was traditionally Republican, even though, as I think we've shown, these were very winnable districts. Um, so one of the things I found in knocking doors, and I think one of the things that makes me stand out within the Progressive Caucus is like I have competitive elections and I have to knock doors and I have to talk to swing voters. Is that I've never had a voter really say to me, standing there in the hot sun on an August afternoon, I never had a voter say to me like, I'm a progressive. What do you have to say to me? I'm a moderate. What do you have to say to me? That's not how everyday people think of themselves. Here's what they are: they're a patient who can't get an appointment with a mental health provider. They're a consumer who's worried about taking out a mortgage because they're worried they might get cheated. They're a worker who is entitled to breaks and overtime pay, who's being a victim of wage theft, right? They're a parent who's worried about the culture wars in our school and what that means for their kid and their ability to learn. So I think that the labels really don't connect to people. And I think one of the things I've tried to do successfully is just be fairly straight. I'm not going to say brave, although I do think that helps, about just telling people what I think and why I think that way, and doing it without using labels. Not only labels within the Democratic Party, but I would also say I don't talk that much about Democrats and Republicans. I talk about what we need to do to fix a problem. And people can figure out that if I'm talking about that and I'm a Democrat, that the Republican's going to do it differently. Like I don't find spelling that out helps, because I want to invite every person who might possibly agree with me, whether they're Republican, whether they're a voter, whether they're not even registered to vote, into the conversation, into that policy debate. And so I think avoiding labels is one of the helpful ways that you can do that.
This strikes me that goes to this really broader point in our politics. There's an irony or vexation, I think, if you're a Democrat, because all the people that you just named, Congresswoman, they could very well fit the description of the people we've, learned in the last 6, 7 years have been ardent supporters of Trump, even part of the MAGA core. Working class folks who've gotten a pretty raw deal or been left behind by the modern economy. It seems as if they should be a natural part of a Democratic coalition. But how did the party lose them, do you think? And what does it need to do to get them back?
Well, I don't know that it's fair to put all the blame on the party for losing them. I
Yeah.
think to some degree they did some gravitating. I think the polarization of cable TV has been a real problem. One of the things I often remind my voters when they're like sort of supporters and they're talking about Fox News is, Fox and MSNBC are very different. They have different journalistic standards, but the one thing they have in common is that they're both not news channels. They're commentary, and that is different than news. And so one of the things I think I try to deliver is like just the facts. And after I have established those, then to talk about what I think we should do about it and just start there. And I think when you turn on the TV, whether you're turning on MSNBC or Fox, they're not starting with the facts. They're starting with what they think about things. And they're leaving people out of that sort of building block. So I think one of the things Democrats need to do is to establish kind of what the problem is, what the challenge is, and then move into the debate. So, for example, with this recent debt ceiling thing, the way to talk about this, I think, and I did this in a hearing, was to say, look, like a lot of us have budgets. We don't want to spend more than X dollars on Christmas presents or holiday gifts, Hanukkah presents. But you go on the store and everything's so cute, and you remember you have this aunt that you also want to get something for, and when you walk out, you love everything in your cart and you buy it. A month later, when you get your credit card bill, you can't call up the credit card company and be like, you know what, I had a personal debt ceiling that I went over, so I'm not going to pay for any of that. I'm going to keep the goods, but I'm not going to pay for them. What would happen to you as a consumer if you did that? Oh, well, you might get sued. You might get foreclosed on. Your credit rating would go down. It cost you more if you borrowed in the future. Well, guess what, America? That's what the debt ceiling is about. If we don't pay our past bills, all those bad things that happen to consumers who don't pay their bills will happen to our country. And when they happen to our country, by the way, it trickles down to you, meaning that if you go to buy a car, you'll have to pay $800 more for that car than you would if we pay our bills. That is a debate about the what. We leapt as Democrats right into the Republicans want to do this to your Social Security. And by the way, that's true. Republicans did want to take away a lot of things that I think are really important. But by not starting with kind of what is at stake here? What are we talking about? We didn't bring people along to the point of being able to understand that it was all false pretenses to try to pretend that the debt ceiling was doing anything to discipline our future spending. That was just bullshit. But we couldn't show that to the American people very effectively because we didn't start at the beginning. So I think, as a teacher, being a professor, I taught, you're a lawyer, the Uniform Commercial Code. This is now one of the more interesting subjects. Like, people don't come to law school wanting to be a UCC lawyer. They want to be a constitutional lawyer or a criminal lawyer. So I had to be the party in the classroom. I had to bring the fun. I had to really think about how do I engage people. And I think that teaching background, more than anything else, is actually where we as Democrats have an opportunity to start conversations at the beginning and invite voters who maybe have left the party to come back in, to hear what's really going on, to think for themselves then about what that solution might be. And so I think we need to do a lot more of that.
I mean, look, so I see this as a personal strategy, but man, talk about the sort of headwinds of Fox News and other things. Should Democrats be going more on Fox News? Should they be in town meetings in Iowa? Where do they sort of actually, plant a flag and even deliver this kind of message? Or where do you?
I think that all representatives ought to be doing town halls in their districts, period. Now, I think one of the challenges is for the Democratic Party, I think more so than the Republican Party, and I'll explain why, is when I do a town hall, it's an equal mix of Democrats and Republicans and independents, or at least that's a possibility, right?
Yeah. Well,
When I
that's
knock
the
doors,
districts that you happen to
that's the
be in.
district.
Yeah.
When I knock doors, I'm always only knocking swing voters, right? So Republicans who maybe we can pull over, Democrats who maybe have voted Republican, like I'm always talking to those swing voters. One of our challenges as a party, and this is actually part of what I think I bring to the Senate race and to hopefully being in the Senate, is our Democratic leadership uses a seniority system in the House. Republicans don't.
Right.
And that seniority system means that in order to become a committee chair, to get elevated, you need to have served 15 to 30 years. People in swing seats don't get elected 15 or 30 times, right?
Yeah.
So the people who are our committee chairs, many of whom are really smart and really passionate and really bring a lot of institutional knowledge, they have a lot to give. But what they don't have is a lot of experience talking to today's swing voters. But those committee chairs and those House leaders, right? Think about Speaker Pelosi's district and how different San Francisco is than the typical district that we need to win in California in order to win back the House, right? That district in Riverside County or that district in the Central Valley, very different than San Francisco. So I think one of the things that we could look at Republicans and do is they, because of their different system of electing leaders, have more of a mix of people in safe districts, safe Republican districts, and swing districts. And that shapes their narrative in a different way. And by the way, when they fail to do that and they all just parrot Trump, I think we've seen it hurts them, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be the same thing for us. If we just parrot people who know how to talk to those who are already with us, we will miss some messaging and some connection opportunities with those who are swing. And so one of the things I want to do in California is, as our senator, really model how we can talk about issues in a way that is consistent with our California values. Things like protecting our environment, investing in green energy, bringing down healthcare costs, understanding that immigrants strengthen our economy and our society. There are ways to talk about that are not partisan and that bring people into the conversation rather than exclude them. And I think if our senators using that kind of messaging, it helps trickle down throughout the state and it helps us win in every part and pocket of California.
It's a really interesting point. I think it's also true on the other side. So many of the really most, fanatical members of the Republican Party, they just come from very safe seats. And if they're just calculating, well, I want to go on Fox News, I want to make trouble because that, they're able to do that from their perch, but they're not challenged either to try to go to the center. The book makes a really eye-opening point, Congresswoman, about class differences in Congress, which in some ways you'd sort of escaped after grade school, launched to the East Coast, to all the hoity-toity establishments, but kind of came back with a vengeance after you were elected. You write, in fact, that class divides ruthlessly the members of Congress itself. How does that manifest in ways that the rest of us might not realize?
Yeah. So, for example, when we pay for our housing, this has changed now, but like traditionally, members paid for their own housing. So when I got elected in Orange County, there were four of us who got elected. Gil Cisneros, these are all Democrats who'd flipped seats. Yeah. One of Gil Cisneros who'd won the Powerball, literally a lottery winner. Harley Ruda, who had inherited a successful business and had run it for quite some time. Me and Mike Levin. Harley and Gil arrived during orientation and met with realtors and bought homes or penthouses. I slept on the mattress on the floor in a little studio like a block away. Because I'm a single mom, I go home every single chance. The second votes end, I'm on that plane, going back home to my kids, back home to my constituents, to grocery shop, to do laundry, to do things in my district because it's a swing district. Members who are wealthy, they're spending their time differently. They're like, I'm going to stay in Washington this weekend. They're going out to dinner. It does make a difference. And so I think, when people say, like, I stood up in caucus about a year ago and talked about the cost of food. We were talking about the cost of gas, which is and was, yes. Is a real problem.
especially
And
in
I stood up and
California.
said, I want to talk about the cost of food because it's just as big a problem and maybe more so for poor people. The poorest people don't have a car, they're by transit, but they have to buy groceries. Um, and there was a whole Politico article about my talking about the cost of
Yeah.
food. Like it was considered like, how did I ever know
Right.
this? But it's
What
like, well,
great
because
staffers you must have.
I'm a single
Yeah.
mom. Like it's
They're called
only
Luke,
me
Paul, and
in
Betsy, your staffers,
yeah,
right?
it's only me in the grocery store.
Yeah.
So, when I'm in the grocery store, people will often stop me and be like, I can't believe it's you. And I'm like, how else can I feed these three? They're
Yeah.
so hungry. Like they're growing teenagers, like, tweens are 11, 14, and 17. So how did I know that cereal had become $7 a box and that there were no more coupons? Because I'm there doing the shopping.
Yeah.
Why don't I just Instacart it? Because it costs more. And so that's an example of a way that class difference connects with
But can I
with
follow?
childcare.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Well, I see that totally, and I think it's part of you write memorably. Maybe we'll get back to it. That the job sucks, but the work is great, and all that part, and not to mention the brutal commute. But I wanted to sort of bore down on a little bit because do you think somehow that the wealth and privilege that the vast majority of members bring to the job in some way creates a different view of their mission? I see how it's harder for you, but do you think it's a kind of a defining trait for their work?
no, look, I mean, I think that when you see things firsthand, whether because they're issues in your own life or whether because you are out in your community and witnessing things, I think then you fight for them differently. So, I have had people in Congress kind of come to me and say, like, did you know that childcare costs as much as college?
Mm.
Yes. Because Betsy's tuition at UC Irvine's preschool was more than it would have been for her to be an undergraduate. So why then I think about childcare as a fundamental challenge to the financial stability of American families because I've experienced it firsthand. So I do think there are lots of members who are from well-off backgrounds, who have inherited or have made lots of money, been very successful, who fight and care a lot about working class Americans. I think Democrats do that really well, and we should lean into doing that more and making sure people understand that we do that. But I think how you see it and how you experience it. I'm not waiting for there to be a staff report or a press article about how women are struggling during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I began to struggle during the pandemic the day that schools closed and my kids showed up at home and I still had a full-time job in Congress. So I didn't need the New York Times to write about that. I'm glad they did,
Yeah.
but I began to experience it right away. And so I think what this speaks to is it's just the importance of having a diverse Congress and how we think about diversity. We need members of different races, of different ethnicities. We need immigrants, but we also need different generations. And we also need people from different economic backgrounds. So I think being the only single mom of young kids when I was elected was a different voice than we had heard in Congress before. And I think that's helpful and additive to all of the other dimensions of diversity that we think about.
Gotcha. If I'm not mistaken, I think you today are still the only single parent of school age kids in the Congress, which is kind of
Yeah, I think
incredible.
Nancy Mace, Republican Nancy
Yeah.
Mace, also has school age kids.
And,
Although Nancy's engaged, so I recently asked her, like, "Are you married yet?" So I think she may also be one. But I
yeah.
think Nancy would tell you. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
Nancy's ex-husband is right there nearby, and they do a lot of shared custody, and that's a different
Co-parenting. Yeah.
situation than I have. So.
Hmm. You've called Luke, Paul, and Betsy your toughest constituents. Do they give you a hard time about your votes and positions, or just what's in the pantry?
Oh no, both, all of the
Yeah.
above.
Yeah.
So my son Luke, for a while, had a sign on his door that said "Zero fossil fuels 2030." This or do not enter. This means you, mom. So they definitely have political
Really?
opinions,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that they do. Versus my son Paul is very interested in screenwriting, so we had a conversation about the Writers Guild strike. We had a conversation about copyright laws. and sort of how Disney advocates and lobbies for the extension of copyright. And so I would say there are definitely constituents as well as kids, but of course, first and foremost, they're my kids. So sometimes they try to say to me, well, mom, it's not like you always do everything right. Like you were late to that meeting and I'm going to be late to school. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. Like, I'm your mom and you're going to go to school on time.
And I'm a member of Congress. This is about you, but also more, I guess, another general point about Congress. So you're known for your candor, but you admit that even you're guilty of bullshit sometimes, the why I'm running reasons, etc. And, I often think of members of Congress as basically in a lying mode. That's their sort of operative mode. You hear each sentence and that's not really true. That's not really true. It's like there's this hydraulic force that pushes members of Congress in saying things that just that are lies, really. Is that right? And what is it about elected positions that make people lose their ability to talk straight?
I don't think, I would say I don't hear a lot of lies. There are some.
Yeah.
What I hear is Washington speak.
That's what I really mean. Yeah.
And just, so to me, a lie has a real intentional deception. And I don't think it's a lot of intentional deception. I think it's a lot of intentional kind of disassembling. Like, you're going to say so many different things and see which one sticks. Like you're fighting with your spouse and you try this and it doesn't work. And then you try that and so I think that people sometimes are just worried that if we're honest with the American people, that they won't trust us or they won't like us. But it's the opposite, right? So when we say things like comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah.
Harry, I don't know what that is. What does that mean? I think Trump thought his crappy wall was comprehensive immigration reform, right? That's not what I mean when I say that. So I think it's helpful to just be plain about what you need. So one of the things is people say this is going to have terrible impacts on healthcare. In what way? Like, this is going to make medicine cost more. This is going to restrict your ability to see a doctor, but not impacts on healthcare. Let's just be really clear and precise about what's at stake. So rather than saying things like not raising the debt ceiling would cause economic turmoil, that's true, by the way, in the same way that it's true that Democrats are fighting for comprehensive immigration reform. It's not a lie. But when I hear economic turmoil, I think, well, what do you mean? Like the stock market, some bond market's going to go up. I don't have any bonds. How do I care about that as a mom? But when you say to me, this will cause all of us to pay more for homes, for cars, for student loans, well, then I'm really worried about the debt ceiling because I care about those things. So I think it's a willingness to just be honest. I don't think we're fooling the American public. They know that our democratic institution, our Congress, by the way, as well as our Supreme Court, are in real crisis. And I think we should be honest about that. So what do I think about the Supreme Court when I get asked about it? I just say it straight up. We have a corrupt court. Let's put 4 words. We have a corrupt court.
I think that's 5 because we do 5.
I don't like corruption. So then we're having a conversation about why it's corrupt and how to fix it.
Yeah, that's the better way to put it. I mean, I should amend just the way I asked it because I am talking more about plain spokenness, but I think it's maybe related to all these members in safe districts who are mainly thinking, how do I not screw it up? Whereas, you've got to put it out there when you're fighting for every vote. Let's move, if you will, to, if it's okay, to talk, finish with a little bit about the Senate race. So you're in perhaps the most highly visible Senate race in the country, 3 extremely prominent Democratic candidates. Do you think, and of course, more than that, people need to understand that the primary is not going to be just with Democrats. it's going to be with everybody. And the first two people, maybe it's two Democrats, maybe it's a Democrat and Republican, will face each other in the fall. And that I think is a very different dynamic. But focusing on members Schiff and Lee, do you see a lot of sort of political daylight between you and them? Do you think it's a race that among the three of you will be decided by policy differences?
So there are definitely differences in how we think about Washington and how it works, and how we think about what we need to do to be able to deliver more for the American people. I've been in Washington 5 years, not 2 or 3 decades. I'm newer to politics, and I think Washington needs to work better. I say in the book, I didn't go to Washington to follow the rules. I went to rewrite them. For example, I don't think members of Congress, Democrat or Republican, should take corporate PAC money. I don't think members, and I don't, and I never
You're one of
ever
the
have.
few
And that's a big difference
neither,
in this
yeah.
race. I don't think members of Congress should take contributions from lobbyists. Lobbyists can lobby you, but they shouldn't be buying your vote with donations. I don't take contributions from federal lobbyists. That's a real difference in this race. So I think it's a sort of political difference, not about sort of the more sort of big buckets of policy. Like, do I think that Adam Schiff and Barbara Lee and I will all vote to protect the right to an abortion? I do. And I don't think we should kid voters about that. Like, California's next senator will vote to protect abortion. How are we going to talk about it? How are our life experiences different? I think that matters, and I think the fact that I have a really strong record on corruption, that I've never taken that corporate PAC money, that I have experience in swing districts, I am willing to stand up to the forces that have for too long controlled Washington at the expense of families. I think that is something that is an advantage in this race, but will also be something that will help strengthen and improve the Senate. This is an institution that people feel is really, really captured by special interests, and I don't think they're wrong. And I think a vote for me is a vote to shake that up and to be willing to challenge the status quo, which I think, increasingly with Citizens United and other decisions, is leaving American families behind.
Okay, so I just want to underscore, I think you're talking a lot about life experience, diversity in the way you've put it, rather than positions. That seems to be your kind of main brief, as it were. Is that fair?
I think that's right.
Yeah,
I mean, look,
yeah,
I also think that we work on different issues. Like, so we have
yeah,
different passions, we have different experiences. So I care a lot about oversight. I care a lot about closing
yeah.
that gap, right? So we all voted for the inflation. I'll give you a great example. Barbara and Lee and Adam Schiff and I all voted for the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we're all glad we took that vote. I am really focused on, where is the actual tax rebate? How do
Yeah.
people go get a stove that doesn't have pollutants? Where is the information? I can't find it. I don't have air conditioning and it's getting hot, right?
Yeah.
Where do I go
We
get the
won't
heat
talk
pump?
about
Where's
heat pumps here.
like
Yeah.
heat pumps, which confusingly keep
Right.
you cool,
Yeah,
right? Back
exactly.
in.
Right.
But so I'm really focused on the implementation piece of that. I serve on the House Natural Resources Committee, so I do a lot of work on conservation. I represent a coastal district. I do a lot of work on tribal stuff. So there's just different areas I think of emphasis. And then look, I'm at core a consumer protection housing person.
Yeah.
That's who I was before I came to Congress, and I've only been here a handful of years. So when I look at California, I think the biggest challenge we face as a state, and increasingly, by the way, other states are joining us, is the cost of housing.
Yes.
And so Democrats don't talk about housing a lot, right? And I think it's the number one policy challenge facing California families. I hear kids say to me, I love California, I love going to college here, but I know I can't stay. I hear businesses saying, we love having our headquarters in California, but it's really hard to recruit workers here. I have seniors saying, I want to retire, but I still have 10 years on my mortgage. So I think I'm going to emphasize those issues in a way that is different. And I think responsive. I think Democrats need a stronger economic message if we're going to win the voters we need to win. And that's my bread and butter and something I do really well.
Got it. And just to bring it home to the primary and the system I talked about, because it is you're really not running just against those two. I mean, I'm not that close to it, but I don't know how people would handicap the odds of somebody other than a Democrat winning the second vote. But you've got to be successful. Not just in distinguish yourself from the Democrat, but in also keeping Republicans, as do all three of you, from becoming the second person. How do you sort of thread that needle at the primary level? You know, normally people are thinking, look at whatever, DeSantis, you know, running super hard right, because that's what you do in a primary, then back to the center, and there's the equivalent on the left. But California doesn't quite permit that, right? Because you're running against everybody in the primary.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not changing what I believe in and what I've done. I'm going to continue to talk about issues and lean into them in the same way. This is not a political calculus for me. I know that the way I engage voters and the way that I fight for working Americans, the way I'm willing to stand up to powerful interests, whether that's a administration official who isn't getting their job done or a CEO who doesn't care about his employees, I know that that reaches and touches voters across ideologies because I've done it in Orange County 3 times over. So for me, I think I just continue to do what I've done, which is hold powerful people to account, be willing to tackle the corruption that we see in Washington. And I think that is something that both activates some of our most kind of left-leaning progressive Democrats who sometimes critique the Democratic Party for not, for instance, refusing corporate PAC money, but also pulls in some of the independents and people who say, you know, I don't trust politicians. I don't think people in Washington, they're all the same. I think the fact that I do Congress differently helps me connect across a very broad range of voters.
Can't think of a better way to encapsulate your mission. Congresswoman Katie Porter, thank you so much for being with us today. Best of luck to you and your other fine opponents in the coming race.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.